Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Kristen's Corner, a podcast by your state senator, Kristen Phillips-Hill. Thank you for tuning in. We're picking up on our special series of podcasts regarding the coronavirus, and we continue to talk to those who are on the ground, on the front lines in various industries. Last week, we spoke with Dr. Gasparak from WellSpan to learn about how our local healthcare system is handling the coronavirus, as well as Kevin Schreiber of the York County Economic Alliance to talk about programs available to employees and employers during this pandemic. And today, it's great to be joined by our very own district attorney, Dave Sunday. Welcome, Dave.
Good morning, Kristen.
Well, Mr. District Attorney, it's wonderful to have you on this podcast. And again, this podcast recording is over Zoom, so we are adhering to CDC guidelines and practicing social distancing. First, a non-COVID-19 related update for our listeners, but still relevant to the coronavirus pandemic. Our district attorney was instrumental in working with members of the General Assembly, including Representative Seth Grove and me, to push forward legislation known as the Buyer Beware Act. And the bill aims to halt the modern day slavery known as human trafficking by penalizing those involved in the demand for these victims. And the thought process is, if we can end the demand, we can end human trafficking, or at least put those on notice who solicit the services of these victims that they're going to face severe consequences. On April 5th, this act took effect. So with that in mind, and knowing that April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month, Dave, what can you tell us about what's being done now that everyone is under the governor's stay-at-home order? How are we keeping children, as well as, if you want to touch on human trafficking victims and children, how are we keeping them safe during this unprecedented time?
Well, Kristen, first of all, I appreciate you starting out with that question. And the reason I say that is because when we sit up here in the DA's office and we talk about, what worries us the most with regard to, I'm going to say the second, third, and sort of fourth order effects of this pandemic and the stay-at-home order, I can tell you right now that the main one without question is what is going on with child abuse in particular. And the reason I say that is because not everybody's shelter is in a safe place, right? And so due to the nature of this pandemic and due to the nature of the way society is right now, unfortunately, we really do not have a window into what is going on in a lot of these people's homes. Typically, when we have a child that's abused, oftentimes that sort of comes to light through the process of someone in the community identifying it, another family member, often a school teacher, for example, or maybe maybe a clergy or something of that nature. And because everybody's at home, that's just not happening. And so all of our mandated reporters aren't in a position to report. And so because of that, we really don't know what's going on, Kristen. I mean, that's something that, I think I would be disingenuous if I said we had a handle on it, because we certainly don't. And that's something that we find to be very worrisome. With that being said, of course, the message that we've been trying to get out repeatedly, and I know, and the DA's office, police, everybody, is if you see something, say something. Even though, like, let's say you're a neighbor and you happen to see something that worries you, or you're a family member and you're aware of something that worries you, at the very least, you can notify, the police. You can call Children, Youth, and Family. There's different things you can do. But at the same time, I think we all need to be cognizant that when this is over and kids are back in school, that, I think that it's going to be interesting to see sort of how that unfolds.
Well, and those are certainly great tips that you've provided to folks to help recognize signs of child abuse, and as well as to let them know what to do if something just doesn't seem right. So I really appreciate that. Let's shift gears just a little bit. We've had multiple phone conversations over the last several days about the governor's release of certain inmates in an effort, the governor has said, to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 in our state correctional facilities. And for folks who are listening, Late last week, without any input from the General Assembly, the governor ordered the process to release certain inmates within state prisons amid the coronavirus pandemic. I am opposed adamantly to this move, and one of the big reasons is that part of the process does not explicitly involve our district attorney, Dave, and your office. One important aspect of that plan is it does not provide you or any other duly elected prosecutor a veto option. Unless, my perspective is that elected district attorneys and prosecutors are often in touch with victims and have been through the judicial process and should ultimately have veto power on moving any inmate out of a prison. And just yesterday, we found out that as part of the governor's mandated closure of non-life sustaining businesses, one of those companies that did not get a waiver was a company called VigilNet America LLC. So, Dave, can you walk our listeners through the issues? First, the release, what that means here in York County, as well as VigilNet's waiver application, and if we weren't able to get that fixed, and we worked pretty quickly, what that would have meant to York County.
Sure, and I want to kind of start at the beginning here, Kristen. So when this, I'm going to say about 4 weeks ago, when everything started unfolding with regard to COVID-19, the York County Prison warden was already assessing the safety and security of the prison and trying to determine what he would need to do to keep the prison, York County Prison, safe. Now, I say this because I always like to start local when we discuss these issues. So I'm on the prison board for York County, and that's by statute. The 3 commissioners are on the prison board. Our sheriff is on the prison board, and there are a few others. And what they do is they review policies at the prison and discuss ways to make the policies better, oversee spending, things of that nature. And so through that process, I've had the opportunity to really listen to the concerns from our local warden here in York County, Claire Dahl. And one of the main concerns, this all started out with the work release center, okay? So we have a work release center here in York County, and that work release center usually has around 100 to 120 people that are in that center. What that means, for those that don't know, is we have individuals who might be convicted of a DUI or something, and they're very low risk. And so the court orders that what they do is they get to work during the day, they come back to the work release center, they have to stay there overnight, and so they're allowed to serve their sentence in a manner in which they are leaving to go to work and coming back. That obviously is smart policy for those very certain types of cases where there's no risk of harm to the public. These are individuals who get to continue to work and earn a paycheck, which we all know how important that is. So the work release center was the initial concern, because people go into the community, they come back, they go back out into the community. And the concern is that we could have individuals that are getting COVID-19 out and bringing it back into the prison. Now, why is that important? Because in a prison setting, if for whatever reason a pandemic or a virus would go through the prison, what a lot of people don't understand, Kristen, is that the prison does not have a hospital. Okay, so there's a few points I want to make. The first is that if people within the prison get very ill, they go to the hospital, okay? And when they go to the hospital, they're clearly taking up beds that could be used by other individuals. In addition to that, the COs who are charged with ensuring that the prison is safe, they already have a tough job to begin with. And God forbid, a lot of the corrections officers would get sick, because if that would happen, then there wouldn't be any more corrections officers, which obviously everybody understands how important that is. So with all of this in mind, the decision was made to put together a method and process by which people in work release are screened for a temporary 30-day furlough. So when I say screened, in my office, we have a process in place in which we screen people for all kinds of different things. And, we have our treatment courts, we have pretrial services, we have a lot of different programs in place where we have to screen prison inmates or defendants to determine what type of program they would be appropriate for them. So we already had the system in place to get this done. And so with that being said, we dug into it, and one of the things, there are a few different things we took into consideration when determining who we would agree to be furloughed for 30 days from the work release center. And that's whether or not these individuals could continue with their physical or mental health needs. So let's talk about that to start with, right? A lot of these individuals have physical needs, they have mental health needs, and there's different treatment that they're going through, including they're having medications. And so we worked with our prison here to make sure that that was taken care of for any of these individuals so that they weren't just left on their own wandering the streets trying to figure out what to do. In addition to that, none of the people that were furloughed participate in what we call medically assisted treatment for addiction. And that's something we see with a lot of with opioid addicts, and that's something typically where that's being worked with. Now, here's something that I want to make a very important point about, and this is going to tie into when we turn to the Department of Corrections. So every review that was done is on a case-by-case basis. And one of the things that I made very clear from the very beginning is we would not agree to the early parole or furlough without obtaining input from a victim and guaranteeing that the protections afforded in the Crime Victims Act are in place, and that we are advocating for these victims who have no idea that the person might be on work release to begin with. Well, they should know they're on work release, but who, so we made sure that we're sort of the defenders of the Crime Victims Act. And even though there's a COVID-19 pandemic, that we don't just throw that aside and throw it to the wind and just assume that everything is going to be fine. So that's part of our internal process here. Okay. And so with that being said, Kristen, about 35 people were furloughed for about 30 days from the York County, from the York County Work Release Center. So that's step one here. And I've taken the time to explain that because this is an issue that people are really fired up about. And I think it's critical that people understand exactly what we're dealing with here. So turning back to York County Prison, the people who were furloughed for 30-day furloughs were low risk. They were already out in the community to begin with, okay, going out for their work to do work and come back. And in addition to that, we screened every single one of them to make sure that we were adhering to the Crime Victims Act. So that's part one. So now, with that being said, obviously York County Prison has there are other factors at play. We all know there's a ICE detention center at the York County Prison. So the ICE detention center itself is a situation that makes it a little difficult because people are coming into the prison from all over the state, typically from the Philadelphia area, which we know is a hot spot right now. And so those individuals are screened, and there's mitigation efforts that are put into play here by the York County Prison so that we can keep ourselves from having a pandemic explode within the prison itself. Now, this is really important for 100 different reasons. But like I said, I want to reemphasize keeping corrections officers safe, making sure that there's not an outbreak within the prison. So we did locally what you would expect. We came together, we had a thoughtful discussion, we created a method and a process by which these individuals were vetted. We ensured that the Crime Victims Act was followed, and we did it the right way. And I'm proud of the work that we did, Kristen, to do this the right way. This is an unprecedented effort that went into play here during unprecedented times. And yes, it's important to keep the prison safe, but it's also equally, if not more important, to make sure that our victims' rights are upheld and that we are doing everything we can to keep the community safe. So with that being said, and a lot of people, and just to provide some background here, and I hope you don't mind, Kristen, I'm giving a lot of extra information, but It's
No, I
important.
listen, I think this is great. People need to understand how the decisions are being made. And I have been talking a lot about how protecting the public health is not a mutually exclusive goal with protecting the economic
Mhm.
health of our communities. But there's also that protecting the public safety. That
Mhm.
is equally as important as those other objectives. So please continue.
No, I appreciate that. So in Pennsylvania, there's two different sort of sets of prisons. There's county prisons, and almost every county has a county prison. And then there's our state Department of Corrections. So who goes to state prison? And this is important to understand as we discuss what's happening here. So if you receive a sentence that's basically, I'm going to say, and I'm making this very simple, oversimplifying it, where the minimum part of your sentence is greater than 1 year. Okay, so let's say someone gets a sentence of 1 year to whatever, they're going to state prison. Okay, that's how that works. So if someone has a sentence of, I'm going to say 11 and a half to 23 months, you're going to York County Prison. So the county prison is typically a place where you have people coming and going pretty regularly. So someone will get arrested, they'll go to county prison. People wait there for their trial. People are there if their probation's violated, their county probation's violated. And so it's more of a holding type of scenario, okay, if that makes sense. If someone is sentenced to a lengthy prison sentence, which is greater than 1 year for the minimum part of the sentence, that's called a state sentence. So typically, state prison sentences are everything from multiple DUI offenses to all the way up, obviously, to homicide and rape. So typically, when people go to state prison, they're there for a few years. That's how that works. Now, also with state prison, so our local prison here, the oversight is done typically by local elected officials, our county commissioners, the DA, the sheriff, and so forth. Now, obviously, the Department of Corrections has oversight over the county prisons to an extent, but once you go up to the Department of Corrections, that's a state-run organization, and our state department our secretary of the DOC right now, Secretary Wetzel, he does an excellent job. He's outstanding. He puts a lot of work into doing this the right way, and typically we all work together very well. Well, he clearly has identified an issue that he feels is important, which is somehow finding a way to furlough people from state prison. Now, this is a different sort of situation, Kristen, and the reason for that is because I don't have the sort of day-to-day insight into how a state prison is ran. So once someone goes to state prison, they're all over the state, they go away, and it's out of sight, out of mind until they're released, okay? So that brings us to where we're at right now. And you would be able to speak a little more towards what legislatively, what efforts were done to get to the point we're at right now. But that being said, the governor utilized his reprieve powers to basically say we're going to get around 1,800 prisoners out of the state prison, and that comes out to I think around 3.5% ish of the total population of our state Department of Corrections. The reason given for this is the reason from the Department of Corrections given was for the safety of the prison, to ensure there's not an outbreak at the prison, and one of the issues, Kristen, I can't really speak to is I don't know what mitigation efforts were done with the Department of Corrections. I don't know, like I was able to outline, to lay out for you all the steps that we did here locally with the York County Prison. And I omitted tons from it just because of the time for doing this podcast. But I cannot say the same with regard to the Department of Corrections because I'm not part of that process. And I think it's critical whenever we do something like this, there has to be a specific process and methodology to make sure that the people that are released on a furlough, okay, are individuals that will not be in a position to harm the community. And so with that being said, we received a list from the Department of Corrections with regard to how many of these individuals were from York County. So of the first phase of this, we had 19 people, 19 names were given to the York County DA's office. My senior staff and I reviewed those 19 names. I actually assigned my first assistant DA, Tim Barker, to go through them all with a fine-tooth comb. And of the 19, we objected to 3 of the 19. We gave strong objections to 3. And like you said earlier, Kristen, I don't have veto power over this. All I can do is just give my input and hope that it's adhered to. I will tell you, I've gotten tons of emails and phone calls about this. And what I can say is, we have around 446,000 people that live in York County as of the last census. We had 19 names given to us. So, it's not, at least in York County, it's not really, it's not impactful. The vast majority of the names that we were given are low-level drug offenses. The 3 that we objected to were, one was based on the nature of their underlying offense, which was a DUI, and that resulted in an accident. And the other 2 were both drug cases where the individuals had some things in their record that we just weren't comfortable with. And so we gave a strong objection with facts and data to support why those individuals should not be furloughed. I won't know if they are furloughed or not until down the road at some point, but we'll definitely be watching for that every day.
Well, and that's disconcerting. If you have objections, again, the biggest part of the reason that I did not support what the governor wanted to do was because I felt that you really should have that veto power. You have that knowledge, and you are elected by the people of this county to uphold their safety, and to have that responsibility taken away from you, I think, is reckless. So talk a little bit about VigilNet and why it was so important that we got that waiver taken care of, in terms of what it does, how they function, and how it's essential for upholding public safety.
Sure. So, Kristen, first of all, I want to thank you because, we had an issue come up in the DA's office yesterday that was an extremely serious issue that would impact public safety tremendously. And by way of background, we have, so in an effort to best utilize the resources we have in York County, we engaged with a company called VigilNet. And what they do is they handle all of our GPS monitoring of individuals that are on probation or some sort of, supervised bail, parole. There's domestic violence type of defendants that we put a GPS tracker on them to make sure that they're not going places they shouldn't go. This company also does our drug testing and our alcohol testing for people that are being monitored for their alcohol consumption as a result of, multiple DUIs, things of that nature. And this is a critical component to what we do. And, we're constantly trying to innovate. And this was one of the innovations we had. And by doing this, that allowed probation officers to be freed up to do what they need to do. So instead of checking, constantly doing urinalysis or things of that nature, they now are free to actually go do their jobs as probation officers. And so VigilNet does this. It's extremely important. And we have around close to 500 people are currently under supervision by VigilNet with regard to either GPS, like I said, either GPS, either drug and alcohol monitoring, and all kinds of different things. So with that being said, VigilNet applied for and did not receive a waiver from the governor. And we received an email yesterday to that effect, which caused a tremendous outcry here in the courthouse, because if that was the case, then all of these offenders would no longer be monitored, like I said, with GPS, drug and alcohol monitoring. And that's unlike the 19 people who are potentially being furloughed by the DOC. We're talking about hundreds of people who, including, well, I'll just say hundreds of people who are being monitored for the safety of the community. So we lost, we got very upset about that, obviously. And I made a call to you, Kristen. I called Representative Grove as well. And I can tell you, I was unbelievably happy to see that within about 2 hours that waiver was granted. So I don't know what magic wand you have, or I don't know what you did, but you put us in a position where we were able to really take a deep breath and really a sigh of relief that we were not going to have to deal with a situation where hundreds of people who were being monitored for the community safety weren't being monitored.
Well, and it certainly is good news. And I will tell you, immediately we got working the phones, sending emails, wrote a letter to the governor. The good news is that the governor reversed his prior decision. The bad news is, from a legislative perspective, how many other cases like VigilNet are currently out there. But public safety is essential. And as well as public health and the economic health. And so I know Representative Grove, they're up in session today. He would have probably joined us if he could have. But we're always happy to be able to do our job, which is to solve problems that we have here in York County. Right.
And thank you for that. I mean, that was, I wasn't sure what that would entail if I was looking at a week-long fight here or what, but I can tell you that, getting that information within only a few hours made everybody it was amazing. So thank you so much for helping us out with that, Kristen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now on to another issue that's been a very big issue here locally, and that is over the enforcement of the governor's stay-at-home order. And pardon me, I've been doing too much talking on Zoom and the telephone. But, we saw a few weeks ago that a young woman in Redline was issued a summary offense for driving during the stay-at-home order. And, the story went national. And I think one of the frustrations that I have heard and continue to hear is that the governor's really not been clear on his stay-at-home order. So he's saying publicly, and folks can check his website, that law enforcement will focus on education and not enforcement of the stay-at-home order. But we've seen a few incidents now where people have been cited under violating the stay-at-home order. And I have to say straight up that the district judge granted a request from you, our district attorney, to withdraw that citation that was filed against that Red Lion area young woman, and appreciate that you were able to do that. So the stay-at-home order is being treated at this point like a secondary offense, right? And when I say to people what a secondary offense is, it's like you're not wearing your seatbelt, right? You aren't going to get pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt, but an officer could choose to list that as an offense on your ticket if you are pulled over for something else, running a red light, speeding, any Title 75 violation. So, what can you tell us about what you're hearing, what you're advising law enforcement? Because I think the governor, in my mind, needs to come out and say, this is either not going to be enforced and direct law enforcement that way, or say it's going to be a secondary offense and let the public know that just driving won't get you pulled over, but that you could get a ticket if you have a broken taillight, you get caught speeding, any of those other Title 75 offenses. What are your thoughts?
Well, the starting point here is, and again, as we talk about these things, we focus on the facts and the law. So to begin with, someone being cited for violation of the stay-at-home order, so by law, that's a secondary offense, meaning that the police cannot pull someone over for a suspected violation of that offense, okay? And without going into the weeds on this, you have to have a police officer has to have probable cause that a traffic offense occurred to stop that vehicle. Okay, and so with regard to traffic offenses, what that means very simply is if a car gets pulled over for running a red light, okay, or a stop sign, or speeding, or has a brake light out, or whatever it may be, then that is the only reason why that car can be stopped. Now, obviously, there are other limited circumstances where there could be other crimes occurring, or the police have a warrant. But I'm just talking specifically about your typical situation where people are violating traffic laws. So they can be pulled over for whatever that traffic law is. Once someone is pulled over, and this is something that right now is sort of in the public eye as a result of coronavirus, but the laws surrounding the searches and stops of vehicles is something that we as prosecutors deal with, every single day, because I'm going to say a lot of the crimes that we investigate start out with traffic stops. So this is something we deal with and have dealt with, since the Fourth Amendment, was created. So that being said, as we go through this, one of the things people need to understand is that once a car is pulled over for whatever the traffic violation is, at that point, technically, a police officer can then further investigate, and if they so choose, they could at that point file a citation for violation of the stay-at-home order. Now, there's a couple issues here. The first issue is that, and just to let you know and to let everyone who's listening to this podcast know, I have weekly conference calls with every police chief in York County. And we've made it exceedingly clear, and the police chiefs have acknowledged and understand this, that individuals aren't to be pulled over for suspected violation of the stay-at-home order. So that's part one. So in York County, the chiefs, police officers will not be pulling people over for suspected violation of the stay-at-home order. That's based on the law to start with. And then in addition to that, it's based on a common sense discussion between myself and all the police chiefs, as we do every day and collaborate to figure out the best way to get through this pandemic that we're in. So that's not going to happen, Kristen. And one of the things, part of your question is, okay, once someone is pulled over, can they then be ticketed only for the stay-at-home order? Is that correct?
Well, certainly some clarity with regard to that, because now what we're being told is it's a secondary offense. So if if an individual is pulled over, again, running a red light, speeding, any Title 75 being the vehicle code, any Title 75 violation, then they could potentially be ticketed for this as well. So I think people just need to have that clarity, right? Because I think it puts our officers in a potentially difficult, untenable position if people are being told one thing when law enforcement has been told to do another thing. So I'm just, looking for that clarity so people really understand what their rights and their responsibilities are under the law.
I think that what I would say is, we are in obviously a situation right now that none of us expected to be in, that is something that no one has been in for, I guess since the last pandemic. And so we are all, and when I say we, I mean the collective we in society are doing the best we can to get through this. And I know, everybody is trying to find a way to stay safe, happy, and healthy. With regard to law enforcement and with regard to what they do, I can tell you right now that the vast majority of police officers, they themselves want to stay safe and healthy. And so what you're going to see here is I feel like this is an issue that is one that strikes fear in the hearts of citizens because of the unknown and uncertainty of the world we're living in right now. The fear of not understanding, the fear of confusion, okay, coming from leadership. You brought up earlier mixed messages coming, and I'm not sure exactly how you worded it, but sort of, mixed messages coming from the state. I think that what I want to say, and I want to reassure the people that are listening to your podcast, is that in York County, police officers are not going to pull someone over for suspected violation of the stay-at-home order. Now, what further complicates this, and this is more, I guess, in what has kept you up at night, probably since it started, one of the things, what further complicates this is the lack of a cohesive message on what can be open and what can't. Okay, so when we throw that into what is already a very stressful, uncertain, worrisome environment, you're basically just throwing fuel on that fire. And that, in my opinion, is one of the things that really is causing a lot of this angst in constituents and people that I speak with. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Kristen?
Well, look, I could not agree with you more. When you've lost your job, when your business has been forced to be shuttered, when you aren't really sure how you're going to keep a roof over your head and food on your table and shirt on your back, it certainly does create a tremendous amount of fear and anger. And that's where we're at. And, certainly there are things that are moving in the legislature this week that I hope, the governor will agree with the General Assembly and enact them into law so that we can begin the process of opening businesses to preserve and protect the economic health of families and individuals, and do it in a way that I believe enacts CDC guidelines to preserve and protect the public health. And certainly I think that would go a long way to resolving a lot of our problems. So thank you for that, Dave. What are you seeing on your end overall with crime statistics? Are they up? Are they down? We're hearing a lot of things nationally, but what's it like here in York County?
So locally, and I did a quick unscientific survey, Kristen, this morning to sort of get a feel for what we're looking at right now since the beginning of the pandemic. So overall incidents are down by around probably 20% across the county. So, but when we take a sort of a deeper dive into that, there's some interesting numbers that really come to light. So in April by itself, so if we go, let's see, so let's take March out of this. So when in April, crime's down 25% so far in April. But when we break down the actual numbers, we see some interesting trends. So aggravated assault in one of the larger police jurisdictions in the county is up by 400%. Okay. So, and again, we have to sort of take a little bit of a harder look into that and see exactly what's driving that. Because these are numbers that are tracked by the departments. This is like, we haven't even really seen those cases yet up here in the office. So terroristic threats are up by about 50%. Now, overall thefts are down around 70%. Okay, and I think you'll start to see why start to figure out why some of these crimes. So auto theft, oddly enough, is up by around 50%. Fraud is up by around 30%. Right now, sex offenses are down by around 33%. And the reason for that is, in my opinion, is because of the situation we are in has definitely put people in a position where we're not getting the reports that we typically would, which is really sad. It's something that really worries me a lot. And again, I always say that not everybody's sheltering in a safe place, and that's just terrible. So right now, drug offenses are down by around a little over 50%, if not more. DUIs right now are down 50%. Again, this goes, same thing, crashes are down around 50%. And I think that this is all just just an effect of everyone being at home, quite frankly. And, with regard to businesses, one of the large jurisdictions here, I asked for for sort of, what are you looking at with regard to businesses violating the closure order? In one of the larger jurisdictions, they had about 100 reports of businesses violating the closure order, and only 4 of them were actually founded. And then everybody just they didn't have to really do any type of enforcement at all for the 4 that were founded, and they just on their own did what they needed to do, be that a waiver or closed. So interestingly enough, harassment by communication, so that's text messaging, is up 500%. So you can kind of follow just looking at what people are dealing with right now and sort of track the crime trends, and they're kind of, the only one in here that, really people are home, Kristen. So, people are home. A lot of the crimes, like we look at, again, DUIs because people are at home. Harassment by communication up because people are at home. And so it's interesting what's going on. Again, my biggest fear, and I know we're going to turn at some point in the conversation to addiction and mental health issues, but right now, one of my largest concerns, obviously, again, is child abuse, unreported child abuse, and crimes of that nature. So hopefully we can get through this as soon as possible.
Well, and you bring up mental health. York County has had significant issues with drug addiction and overdose. Great credit to you, as well as our coroner, Pam Gay, for starting the York County opioid task force. And we've seen great work being done here. In many ways, we've been a model for the state, the Mason-Dixon Drug Task Force. We've really been tackling the issues of drug addiction and overdose. With regard to overdose, are those up or down during this pandemic? Drug offenses are down significantly. How about overdoses? Where are we?
Sure. Well, so drug offenses being down, that's just that's an effect of people being in their homes, of, your typical drug supply chains have obviously been impacted by this. However, people that are in the throes of addiction are going to find ways to find drugs. And one of the problems, Kristen, is that, and again, this is what keeps me up at night as well, is we have a lot of individuals in the community who, as a result of the pandemic, aren't going to the typical type of NA sessions or AA sessions or the different type of drug treatment programs that they were going to. That's kind of not happening right now. And if it is happening, it's over the phone or just like this, on Zoom or whatever. And so one of our biggest fears from the beginning is that we would see overdose deaths go through the roof. And unfortunately, overdose deaths have tripled since this started. And it's unbelievably sad. We as an entire community have worked so hard to be in a position where we started to get this under control. And, what we're seeing right now is very, very sad. And it's something that hopefully we can, somehow turn the corner on this very quickly, if possible. I have my fears and concerns that people under the stress of this, Kristen, people that are, not working or people that are being idle are relapsing, which is evident in the amount of overdose deaths. So and again, that ties into, and when you think about it, it's not just the overdose death. It's not just a relapse. It's everybody's in the house together. What's going on with people's families? what is going on with children in those homes? What are the children seeing? What are they hearing? What are they a part of? And so this really has caused a lot of issues. And I know it's caused issues across the whole spectrum of life. But this is, again, one of the millions of side effects that we're seeing as a result of this. That also ties directly into mental health. Obviously, right now, people are under tremendous stress, tremendous anxiety, fear of the unknown. I mean, we typically, Kristen, we're pretty lucky, like I'm going to say, when I say our generation, I mean, basically anyone who didn't fight in World War II. Like, we're pretty lucky because the world has been, that we live in, really has been fairly predictable. I mean, we don't, most people don't live their lives for fear of the unknown. I mean, you kind of know what bad things are going to happen based on the circumstances you're in. And this is something that I think that our society is not used to, is having things change, be put in a position that you have no control over, and really be fearful for your income and for your family. And I think that it has caused a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety, and mental health issues are being exacerbated as a result of this, which obviously ties into the drug overdoses as they're codependent. I mean, as they're, most people have dual issues there. So I think that we have a little hole we're going to have to dig out of here, Kristen. But I think that, I'm telling you right now that, being someone who's been in the fight in this community for as long as I have, the fight against opioids, the fight for mental health, the fight for doing everything we can to make this community safe. I'm telling you right now that we live in a community. We're lucky because people care so much. And I know you know that from dealing with your constituents every day. And I think that there's nothing that we can't get through, but we just got to get to that point where we can start that fight. Because right now we're just sitting back and waiting and watching. And although it's important, obviously, for the health of our community, at the same time, we're in a place where there's a lot of not good things going on that I think we're ready to get out there and start working on.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think back to 9/11. I was a mom of 3 young children. And one of the things that I think really sustained so many families was that they were able to congregate and they were able to come together. Mm-hmm. And I know that you served during those times. Thank you for that service and the sacrifice that you and your family made for all of us. But I can tell you, being back home, being surrounded by family and neighbors and loved ones when everything seemed to shut down was just, it really helped get so many people through those difficult times. And you're right, significant challenges with mental health. Our suicide numbers were not good going into this. All of the factors that you've talked about concern me about, suicide, and as well as the conversation that we've had about domestic violence and those numbers and what they look like, as well as our overdoses. So, and you're so right. We've seen so many people in this community step up in ways large and small. And that's part of what makes York unique and wonderful. So to carry on with that thought, what are the ways that folks in the community can help law enforcement during these unprecedented times?
Well, Kristen, I think that the best way, there's a couple things I'd like to highlight. Just starting with a very basic principle of law enforcement, first responders having what they need to get through this safely. We were able to, through the help of a few different amazing companies here in York, one of them, H&R Pharmaceuticals, they stepped up to the plate and basically they're donating around 1 million of these little ketchup packet size hand sanitizers. And I put it out there to all the police and first responders. And Kristen, I'm going to tell you, I was floored by the amount of organizations that didn't have any, like none, that had no hand sanitizer and couldn't find any anywhere. And so we sort of became, I guess I channeled my inner UPS as I worked at UPS for 8 years. So I channeled my inner UPS.
Logistics.
Yep. And we created a little
tops when it comes to logistics.
Yeah. So we created a logistics hub for hand sanitizer to get that out to police, to ambulance drivers, to firefighters. And that was just, so that's still ongoing as of, today, every day we have stuff coming in and going back out. And then I would say, quite frankly, the best thing you can do is be a good citizen right now. I hate to say that and make it as sort of simplistic like that, but they don't need to be dealing with things that are unnecessary. Meaning, now's a time for us to come together as a community. It's a time for us to, increase our collective bond of being a community. And, what people can do is just be a good citizen. If you see something, say something. I say that, that's easy to remember. If you see something, say something. Don't put police in a position where they could unnecessarily get exposed to COVID-19. That's a constant fear. It's a constant issue every single day, because there are nonstop officers and first responders that are constantly being quarantined as a result of potential exposure. And so the management in the different police departments have to juggle that and keep people out and make sure that the public safety, that the public is kept safe. And they've done a phenomenal job of that, Kristen. Phenomenal. And so right now that's an issue. Again, I would also, to the extent you can, follow the stay-at-home order, for the people that can stay at home, for the people that, for whatever reason, are in a position to stay home, that, just do it. And at the same time, I would say also that, individuals who are aware of something occurring to a child or to a loved one or a friend, call the police and tell them about it. It's better to be wrong and have nothing happen than to not say something, and have a child continue to be abused or something like that. I keep going back to that topic, Kristen. And the reason for that, again, is, I just think about, through my job, you really have a window into the world we live in. And, I think about how blessed and lucky that I am, my family, to be in a position. And I look at my son, who gets to be taken care of by his mother every day, and schooled by his mother right now. And I know that there are so many children in our community that aren't in that position, where home is actually a place of fear and danger, a place that, of anxiety, where they look every day, they look so forward to getting to school to get away from that. And now they're stuck there. And I hate that. And I wish there was something we could do about it. But right now there isn't. And that's something that, really bothers me.
I know that it weighs heavy on your mind. And I really have to thank you. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. Thank you for all that you do to assure our public safety. We're very grateful that you serve as our district attorney. And with that, we conclude another episode of Kristen's Corner, a podcast by your state senator, Kristen Phillips-Hill. Today's guest was Dave Sunday, York County District Attorney. And for more information on today's podcast, please visit my website at senatorkristen.com. Again, this is State Senator Kristen Phillips-Hill. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you again soon.